Marisa Prosser earned her bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Binghamton University, her master's degree in applied medical anthropology from SUNY at Buffalo, and is currently a doctoral candidate in cultural anthropology at the University of Connecticut. Her research interests include immigration, ethnic and cultural identity, and human development and well-being. She previously conducted field work in Costa Rica and Nicaragua and hopes to continue this research with immigrant families here in the United States.
The title of my presentation has a few points involved, and the first one I wanted to highlight was the human race. I think one of the biggest lessons that I had hoped to come out of this project, this experience for my students, was the understanding that there is only one human race, and I think that this goal was accomplished. In addition, the two areas in which we explored this theme this semester in my Introduction to Sociocultural Anthropology class was in the classroom and in the museum. So we did have a two-part project where we had the different settings to explore this concept. So that's where my title comes from. Okay. And of course, the second part of the title, Bridging Anthropologists and Laypersons' Conceptions of Race and Ethnicity. Part of the experience in anthropology is to educate the students about the anthropological perspective on race. And of course, one of the goals I wanted for the students to take out of this experience was to take this understanding, this newfound understanding they had, and to spread it out amongst their social circles so that we could further the mission of the Smithsonian and as well as the American Anthropological Association. In many ways, my task as an anthropology professor is a bit simpler than some of my colleagues in terms of incorporating discussions of race into my class. In fact, there's many built-in opportunities for discussing race. So that was a bit easier for me. So beginning with some of our discussion at the beginning of the semester of the somewhat unfortunate history of anthropology as a discipline. We talk about how anthropology is often nicknamed the handmaiden of colonialism. And of course, as the top image you can see here, some of the dabbling of pre-anthropologists in the Victorian era in the eugenics movement and the cultural evolution movement. However, as anthropologists found out in the early 1900s, thanks to our founding fathers, Franz Boas, and some of his students, Margaret Mead, who is pictured here in the second picture in Samoa. But again, the focus in our discipline turned toward understanding that culture and race were two different things and were largely independent of one another. So this really challenged a lot of the conceptions that people today have, that in some ways your biology or your race influences your culture, the way you behave. And you'll see that this was one of the questions that I had students explore in an in-class exercise, as well as to interview some of their peers outside of the classroom. But one of the things I wanted to focus this project around was to look at this divide that exists between popular conceptions of what race is and, of course, the anthropological understanding of race. So I found this a really good opportunity, and I always do each semester in this course. I find that because of our long history in anthropology of uncovering some of the misperceptions of what race is, I always find that it's a valuable lesson for the students. In this particular project, I hope that they would take that outside of the classroom. So my course is Anthropology 101, the Introduction to Sociocultural Anthropology. And there's a variety of learning objectives in this course, but the one that I chose to focus on was to look specifically at what is this anthropological perception or perspective on race. So there's three main points to this, and those are listed up here on the presentation. But races, again, the main idea, and this is illustrated in the exhibit I chose, that races are socially constructed categories with no basis in biological reality. Well, this textbook definition is appealing in many ways. It's really a hard one for the students to get their head around in some ways, because they're so used to their own ideas, pre-existing ideas coming into the classroom. Of course, biology and culture are largely independent, and of course, the one I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, that there is only one human race, or one race, the human race. So the way I approached this project, or my goals of having them communicate what they learn in this classroom every semester, this opportunity with the Smithsonian Fellowship of using museum exhibits was to take this instruction, of course, outside. So one of the things I wanted to start with, just as to inform the project before I talk about this, is that I felt quite fortunate throughout this experience of exploring the museum exhibits to find that there was an exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, the Race, Are We So Different exhibit. And I had been familiar with the website that accompanies this exhibit for some time, and so I have used the website in various ways in the classroom. However, with the museum, I thought this would be a really great idea to take this experience of understanding race, to take it beyond the kind of knowledge that they say, oh, that's really interesting, and then they file away in their notebooks, and into something that was much more memorable. The experience of going down to the museum, of seeing the objects, and of putting together some sort of a visual presentation that they could create from this. But anyway, I want to just start out by finding out what were some of the common misperceptions about race. And we did this through an in-class writing exercise. And the 3 questions up here, pretty basic, but you wouldn't believe the answers we got. Well, maybe you will believe the answers we got. In some ways it was surprising, and not so surprising in other ways. However, this exercise, I was told afterward, was quite enjoyable for some of the students. They really took on this opportunity, and I got 2 pages, after 20 minutes in class, I got 2 to 3 pages of long descriptions. And then, of course, you had a few that had, 2 sentences. So, some of the variation and the interest in this topic within the classroom. But anyway, I wanted them then to take this experience that they were doing in class and to take it outside and to interview their peers, so their family, their friends. That could be anybody. But I wanted to see, were there any differences between anthropology students' ideas and the common public, the public outside. So they did 2 interviews with their peers. Then we came together and we devoted a classroom period to analyzing the compiled answers that we came up with. And so again, the goal was to reveal these common misperceptions. So some of these, and again, some are surprising and some are not so surprising. One of the ones we consistently found in our answers was that people said that there were a specific number of clearly defined human races. Of course, going all the way from 3 races to some people had up to 24 that they had creatively laid out in different ways, which I was a little impressed by that. Again, a common misperception, and again, this probably comes from many years of having to check forms where they have to fit themselves into some sort of category. Race can be determined by skin color. In fact, many answers were race is skin color. Okay. So for some other students, the idea was that we could determine our race by looking at our DNA. So there was this idea that because of this all new powerful technology in microbiology and genetics, that we could figure out what race we were through DNA. Race and culture are basically the same thing. So there were a lot of answers saying that you learn your culture because of your race, or vice versa. Various interpretations of this idea that race and culture were basically the same thing, which is again something that in anthropology we try to actively distinguish between. Cultural beliefs vary depending on what race you are. So again, another incarnation of the previous answer. And of course, finally, just to sum this up, another common idea was that different races of people have different inborn talents and abilities. And again, we can see this a lot in stereotypes that are portrayed in the media as a variety of other resources. So the second part of the assignment was to visit the museum. So the exhibit I chose was, again, the Race, Are We So Different exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. There were many great exhibits that would be useful in an anthropology class. However, I felt that this one, I wanted them to really devote a lot of time to one exhibit. So I required 2 hours, and of course, many spent more than that. So that was very interesting to see that some students were very engaged in that. Let's see. So our goal then, of course, of educating outside of the classroom about the anthropological perspective on race was to dispel these misperceptions. So now we know how people typically think about race in our society. So how can we use our knowledge, our newfound knowledge as anthropology students to educate? And so the task then was to collect evidence. And so I had them use the exhibit as a resource for collecting evidence. And the exhibit's set up in a variety of ways. There's some hands-on interactive displays that talk about evolutionary processes that lead to human variation. There's a good discussion of the history of race, how race has been portrayed across space and through time. And of course, the lived experience of race, which is how people experience race today in our society. So we went to the museum as a group on a Saturday. And how I approach this is that students chose which of these three particular areas or themes within the concept of race that they wanted to focus on. And I allowed them to choose it, so we ended up with about 3 evenly spaced groups that were looking at these different ideas. So the task then, they would go around using the artifacts and the ideas that were portrayed in the exhibit as their evidence, collecting it on worksheets. And then the assignment, I assign a lot of papers, so I was looking for something different and something for students to creatively be able to express. So I decided to come up with something called fact sheets, or to come up with an idea of fact sheets. But basically the students were to take this evidence they had collected and to put it into a pamphlet form or that could be disseminated. Widely accessible. One of the project objectives would it be attractive, so that people would be able to pick it up and read about it. So again, the idea being public education. So sharing the knowledge became the third part of the assignment. And again, I thought this was a good way to take this important information outside of the classroom. So here's a sampling, you can see, of some of the projects. And again, students got creative in their use of images. There were some with embedded videos and graphs. So one thing that really came out of this too was that you could see the students' individual interests and what they were attracted to. I didn't tell them, you should go look at this. I just said, use whatever you find interesting. What would convince you if you had to be convinced that race, for example, was not, that there weren't distinct categories of race. And so anyway, they focused on a variety of different aspects, and I was quite impressed with several of the projects. So again, one of the things, I wanted students to see then their role as being a bridge between this academic understanding, the anthropological perspective of race, and being a bridge between that and the rest of the community. And so I think students learned through this process of what they could do, what was their role in this education system. So instead of just receiving information from me, they could use it and educate other people. So bridging the knowledge gap. Students became the bridge. They were able to, the goal through these projects was to translate a lot of somewhat confusing concepts. A lot of especially the human variation aspects for people that haven't had a long experience in evolutionary processes, they were able to take through the use of images, et cetera, to translate these confusing concepts into a format that people could understand. They were also able to explore the effects of culture. Again, another learning objective in the class is for students to learn how society and culture shape our perceptions and ideas of reality. So one of the things I also, again, a side thing I hope they would learn from this experience was that even what they learn in this classroom is set within a particular context, a time period, a historical period. And so too often we do take scientific knowledge as the ultimate truth. And one of the lessons, I think, particularly for the students who focused on the history theme, was that they were able to see how in the past science had really colored people's perceptions in different ways and shaped people's perceptions to the point that could be very damaging in society. So that was one of the things that they got out of that as well. Some of the project successes and lessons learned. One of the things is this exhibit was a temporary exhibit, so I'm hoping to come up with another Smithsonian project for future classes. I'm actively working on that now. But anyway, I think a lot of the experience that many of the fellows in this cohort have found out is that, again, some of the students visited the museum for the first time. I had a few students tell me this specifically. They went in groups, so they were able to, instead of sitting in a classroom and listening from me, they were able to form peer groups and to make friends. So that was a really valuable experience, I think, for some of them. They helped each other find the museum. The class visit to the museum was a welcome break from the regular class routine. And like I said before, I've used the Understanding Race website in various ways in class, but this one I think they really got something different out of. It's one thing to see an image on a screen, but to actually see, for example, the calipers that the Victorian scientists were using to measure skulls and compare hair colors to classify people. That was something that really stood out in a lot of their minds. So that was a very welcome break. And of course, a lot of hands-on interactive displays. So when something is fun to play with, there's a lot of buttons and colors. It seems to draw us in as human beings. So there was a lot of interest and engagement with the particular topic. Again, some students had some trouble in understanding, exactly what their role was in terms of, as bridges to communicate this knowledge. So I think, some of the lessons learned were perhaps to devote a little bit more time prior to the visit at the museum so that they could really focus their experiences there. But overall, I was quite happy with the project. The different creative ways that students used in their presentation, again, some struggled with it really, with color, with placement of objects, but overall I was quite impressed with the projects, and again, we'll use this format of assignment in the future. Thank you. That's